Welcome to the Trade Show Podcast, the home for conversations with global leaders in the trade show and events business. Our show will bring you face to face with experts who speak about the possibilities and trajectories of this $50 billion industry. I'm your host Shubhanjan Sarkar, founder of Pitchlink, the next generation visitor engagement platform where our mission is to make conversion easy. Welcome to the 11th episode of the Trade Show Podcast. Thank you for listening and your continued feedback. If you have suggestions or you want to listen to a specific guest, please write to me at shubhanjan@pitch.link or message me on LinkedIn. Both links available in the show notes. Our guest today is Martin Kelly, the president of Blueprint, a connective event studio brand.
If I am a buyer persona, I'm often looking for things to make my life easier. When it comes to startups, they're popping up and maybe I'm not aware of this new startup that can help me, but events can be a great space to find new ideas. So in terms of kind of like, why would an allocator fill out a very detailed survey? They need to be sold on the vision of why it's going to be helpful. And they need other allocators or other people that they trust in the industry to say, it's worth your time. Fill out the survey, do it. It's going to save you in your time in the long run. And what we basically had, is you get a lot of stories of people who got wins. Where did you find this great fund manager? I found it from this event.
Martin oversees Blueprint, which brings together innovators across the real estate, construction, and climate sectors, redefining the future of the built world. In his role as president, he defines the event strategy and develops industry partnerships while also being part of the connective leadership team the event studio Blueprint is part of. Before taking the helm at Blueprint in 2022, Martin was managing director at Context 365, a leading alternative investment technology platform. He led the business development efforts for both the year-round digital platform products as well as the events portfolio until it was acquired by Apex. Martin first started his career in London working for Terrapin, a leading global B2B media business, before moving to New York in 2010 and subsequently becoming Managing Director, Americas. During his 14 years with the firm, he launched multiple event brands, acquired events, and successfully turned around the profitability of the US business under his leadership. He has also held roles as one of the founding members of the Great British Business Club Committee for UK Trade and Investment and other advisory positions. Now, on to this insightful conversation with Martin Kelly. Martin, welcome to the Trade Show Podcast. I'm so happy to have you here and having this conversation. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Subhanjan. I really appreciate it.
When I look at the kind of work you have put in the industry, which is close to 3 decades, if I may put it that way.
You're making me sound pretty old there.
or you started really early.
Yeah, well, I did that as well, yes.
Yeah. You went through multiple kind of roles and multiple kinds of organizations which had very different views of the same product, which is trade shows, right? What do you see when you look at the industry from where you are today?
Yeah, so my background spans a long time in events and in different types of companies. So in terms of how I look at the industry, the way I look at it is maybe through a slightly different lens from some other event professionals. So to take a step back, I started my career at Terrapin. I spent 14 years there, became the managing director of the US business, left when the pandemic happened. We'd actually put the office into a really good position. I pivoted all the events to virtual, which was a really good process to go through, although very difficult at the time. And there came up an opportunity to go to another firm, Context, and that was something I couldn't turn down. I was particularly interested in the ways to match a buy side and a sell side, and this was in the alternative space. And they were building a year-round technology platform. They wanted to sell SaaS products essentially, and they had these amazing events that were very tech-enabled. So that was an opportunity for me to diversify my experience essentially. So to not just be in the events industry, but also be in the finance and tech world. And so I took that opportunity, and that was really good. It gave me a really good insight into a different world and different learnings about how you could use technology. And then I came back into events after that was sold to Apex to work with the Connective event studio. And I head up Blueprint, which is a built world event in the real estate and construction space. And that's been really excited. And that's a very tech forward event as well. So in terms of looking at the event space, there's the industry has obviously gone through an interesting time, having come through the pandemic. We've seen it pivot to virtual, come back again. So events have come back with a bang across the board. But there's some very, I think, interesting ways in the future to connect people, and that's maybe something that we're not doing enough of yet. So I can get into more depth with some theories on that.
Of course. So let's go back a bit to the Terrapin days, and that was a very long period, and you have seen the industry evolve. May not be the way it has happened since 2020, because that has been rapid, that has been quick, that has been intense and very diverse. So that people really had to look at multiple ways to do things, right? But when you look at the Terrapin days, what kind of shifts did you see, and what did you see actually carry through when the pandemic came?
Yeah, so my time in Terrapin is very interesting. When I began my career, I started as a hybrid. So I was doing both conference production, producing agendas, researching agendas, launching new ideas. And I also was selling. And that was kind of like a unique role at the time at Terrapin, where they would hire people very young and have them do both roles, particularly in the finance sector, because the finance sector had complicated topics. And so they found that if people understood the topic, they could sell it. So they would have this where you do everything. And it's actually really good for the future, because it gave me more of a holistic skill set from the get-go. So that was very interesting. At that time, Terrapin was very orientated towards content-led conferences. So the sweet spot might be, a 400-person conference in a hotel, targeting quite a specific area, and the range. There was obviously a range of those, but they would do lots of topics, and you'd have a finance division, a pharmaceutical division, all these other areas, and there was many different events, and your portfolio might be a mix. You might work in different sectors, and so year round you could be working in infrastructure, in online gaming, in hedge funds, in a pharma event. You could be doing multiple different things. And by the time I left Terrapin, there had been a shift towards doing less events and doing larger events. And this kind of, I'd also been through the recession with Terrapin. And during that period, it was an interesting learning experience to see it, when I wasn't in a managerial position, but to see how people responded to it, in terms of that there's a gravitational force to larger events in bad times. So in terms of recessions now, and also maybe a pandemic situation, all these things out of your control, events will still exist. The weaker brands will disappear. The stronger brands will actually sometimes do better in worse times, because people might pick the one event they do. So that was kind of a big learning over the years of Terrapin, and essentially my experience went from just conferences to, by the end, we were acquiring expos very much in the trade show arena, and Terrapin has gone on since I've left to continue that, and has made some really amazing acquisitions in that space, and they have incredible amount of attendees now that attend the shows, very different from the company I was at the very beginning. Right. So in terms of the evolution, I'd say I was there over that period of time, but the company I left was different to the company I joined.
Yeah, and you did see their transition into the virtual event mode as well, right?
Yes, so that was a tough time, in terms of like you had other businesses, let's say, who have a publishing arm or have other products. Terrapin was an events focused business, and so at that time, with events shutting, and it was global, so it was impacted in terms of China shutting down very significantly for the Singapore office or what have you. So that was a huge issue for an events focused business. And so we had to pivot the event successfully to virtual, and to hold on to, the revenues of the people that have invested us, to pitch them on the vision of how this virtual event was going to work for them. And that was actually kind of as well, it ties into my thinking or my thought process around how important it is to connect the right people. Because in these conversations I'd have with a number of sponsors who we have their money, the key thing for them was still lead generation or connecting with people. And so it was kind of, how can you do that in a virtual format when you can't kind of have a mixer or that face-to-face interaction? And we had to kind of come up with creative ways to fulfill that need during the virtual times. And that might be doing some things maybe that you can do better virtually. So it might even be things like lead generation. You have maybe more data points easily accessible to you than in the physical times. Now, of course, actually, when we ran accounting events in the past, for things like accountants getting CP credits, you'd actually scan everyone's badge who's coming into a session. So you knew where everyone was, which sessions they were doing. But not every event organizer does that. When you go to virtual, you actually do have that data of where people are going if you've got different tracks. So there are some advantages to that format, and that in the time where there are no other options, that can be useful for those business development groups or what have you. So it was a fascinating experience to go through to see what is appropriate for the virtual format and what's not, because you don't want to do a like for like. And that was my big kind of quick learning in constructing something that was going to be of value. And then actually I left to go to Context. Before those events, most of them actually ran virtually, but I'd set them up.
Right. Before we sort of transition to Context, I want to dig a little bit here. What did you did mention a few, but can you elaborate on what actually were the changes and what were the challenges as a large, conference expo organizer, to be in that position where you suddenly see that the entire premise of how you run your business is suddenly gone. And what was really going on? I mean, I have had conversations, but not this. Nobody was there in a position to tell me about this. What was really going on inside the industry, inside your organization, whatever you can say. I mean, obviously there is anything confidential is not necessary. But basically the point is, what was the thought process? What was going on as things were unfolding? And because you had schedules, right? So this whole thing is unfolding in March, April, May timeframe of 2020. And you must have had a full calendar for the whole year. And It was all planned, the venues were booked, and so much was going on. Money had been received and people would have paid. And I mean, there was confusion all around. What was really going on inside the organization at that point? And what were you doing in the leadership suite?
Yeah, I mean, it was a scary time for the whole industry. And it's kind of funny because now, it's funny to even look back at some things in the pandemic that even you as an individual were going through and experiencing. And in terms of leading the business, I think there was, you go through different phases. There's denial, right? Which I think everybody lent into. That it's going to blow over. It's happening across the other side of the world. But actually going back to that point of being a global business, Terrapin had an advantage in a way of that it actually had to figure out a strategy quicker than if you were just a US focused business, because it took longer to kind of really impact the US. If you got a global business and it was really affecting other areas first, it's kind of like the canary in the coal mine situation. You had to figure out a strategy and had to figure out. So we benefited a lot. So my former colleague Sharon Rosen has to be complimented a lot around figuring out, looking at virtual platforms. We ended up going with like a swap card and comparing those. And so I was on a lot of calls with different virtual providers, and essentially, so it's not just the provider, but it was kind of figuring out what is appropriate for virtual, what's the plan, what decisions you're going to make about what the offer is going to be to everybody. So if you have like a 10-track event in a pharmaceutical space, is 10 tracks appropriate for a virtual format? Probably not. But you consolidate it, and maybe you do certain things to make it easy. And again, what's the offering that's going to be valuable to people? And in terms of being in the trenches, there was a lot of calls. The tough aspect of being in a leadership position is that you set a strategy, you put it into play, but then in terms of the events, I was running over 15 events. There's so many sponsors across all those different events, and if you set this strategy, they're all going through their own pain points as well. So many might be very positive and pro about the strategies, but there's also a sliver that would have issues, and they're trying to survive in their own way as well. And in a leadership position, the buck stops with you, so you have to be on those calls, you have to work out solutions. And it was a real test of of the business development managers, the producers. It was a stressful time, and some people, I was running the New York business. The tough aspect in terms of the human element is that some of my employees, and I did feel for them, were by themselves potentially in an apartment, or with maybe their roommate has gone off to another place, and they're just locked in a small apartment, and then they've got their world kind of changing or seemingly collapsing because we are an event organization, and everything it's not sure, will we survive? Will the events industry survive? Will it be completely different in the future? And at that time, you really didn't know. So that was kind of, you're taking me back to those those moments, but those were all the sort of thoughts going through your head. And I think you really kind of challenged and thought, wow, if it's kind of like, the Google managed creativity with constraints. It's like, if there was not an events industry, what would you do? And you kind of had to ask yourself that type of question. And that's ultimately why I ended up at Context, was through that process. I was interested in diversifying anyway, because I've done 14 years already in the events space. Right. And the other aspect in terms of strategy was, how do you come out of that? The one positive aspect again of the pandemic is that it was the cost involved in launching an event is significant, right? You've got to get a hotel cost, you've got to commit to it, you've got to commit resources, and there's spend. For a virtual event, you can actually test concepts in a cheaper way. And you could monetize it if it was in a sweet spot and serving that need. So again, there were kind of these positive aspects coming through. But for me, I was more passionate about the connecting buyers and sellers, essentially. So that's why I wanted to dive into that.
When you were looking at these platforms, because there was a bunch which came up. I mean, there are some big stories about platforms like Hopin, which disintegrated quite rapidly after the pandemic was over, and there are some which are still there. When you are looking at these platforms, what kind of conversations were you having? Because that will give us a segue to go to Context. I'm just saying that when you are talking to these guys or these people platform, what were you looking for to be there, and what were they telling you in terms of, okay, we have innovated this and we have innovated that? One of the obvious thing is that rapid networking piece that one of them or some of them sort of had, right? So you could get into a room and you could meet someone every 3 minutes or whatever. But what were you looking for, and what were you hearing from the tech guys?
Yeah, I tell you what I wasn't so interested in, which I saw quite a lot of, and that was kind of these mock-ups of booth scenarios where people would kind of walk around booths. I just didn't really feel like that really mirrored the true experience. Maybe in the future when you have true VR integrated, but the technology was not quite there for that. So those type of offerings just didn't really do it for me. What was very important was the kind of quality of the content, because that was still going to be the hook. That's still going to be very important for people, and the ability to connect, to find the right people and have a Zoom call. And so the providers that were advanced in that way, making it very easy for matchmaking behind the scenes, that was critical for me. And Swapcard, Grip, all these ones had good offerings around that. And some others did not. It was kind of they focused on other areas which was not as interesting to me. In terms of that time, you needed simplicity almost, in terms of simplicity of what is the ROI going to be? How can I explain it to all these people that, because I need to turn this around really quickly, and I need to get this out, and I need to have a clear message of how the ROI is going to be proved. And so where there was more unproven, more complicated things that I didn't see that they were already working, they might have just been a bit too premature, and the tech not really there for what they were trying to do.
Sure. We will come back to the ROI question, because that, I think, is the thorniest question in the trade show industry. We'll come back to that later. Let's talk about context. So all this is going on, and I'm assuming that somehow you got in touch with, or they got in touch with you, and you saw this opportunity. So what really happened?
Yeah, so they actually a former colleague of mine had gone there, and they had some changes, and so that was when he recommended me, and it was during the pandemic. So I had my interviews with the head of HR on a park bench outside with no one around, no shops open or what have you. Very surreal experience to be making a change during the pandemic, but it made sense, and the what they had was an amazing event in Miami that brought together allocators and alternative fund managers, and it really was fantastic. And they had an incredible tech team, and so the really it was a meetings event, and the advantage was that the fund managers would upload a lot of data, so their performance. And you could track by performance. You could do different filters, and the allocators would provide a really incredible survey. So they would fill out a very detailed survey of what they were looking for, and that's because. And I worked in alternative investments in Terrapin. I've done hedge fund events, family office events, right. And a real pain point is that. Yes, there's going to be family officers walking around, but family officers know what they're interested in or they're not. And it could be very much so that you could go up to them and they just totally can't invest in you. There's just, and so this solution had kind of come through, these events have come through to bridge that aspect of capital raising. Right. Now, what was being attempted was to build a year-round community where it's not just in the events that you would have that, because that's still a pain point year-round. And so that's where we were actually working on two different product lines in parallel. So a year-round SaaS platform where you pay for an online subscription to be able to have meetings year-round. And also the events where you could have meetings in person, and so you'd have different price points for those, and that was super fascinating, because we were really kind of like operating like a startup and trying to build up a community, and also we were asking people that knew us for the events to also now know us for the SaaS product and the year-round platform, which was different, and the behaviors are different, and we also had to figure out different ways of what's going to be attractive for the fund managers to invest in you in terms of what they're looking for. And so you get into the world of mandates from pension funds and things like that, data that's available that you can make easier for people to analyze. So that world was really amazing. And what the level of sophistication in the technology to help the matching between a family office which might be looking for a very specific type of strategy to fund managers, and all the data that they would keep up to date, and the managers would keep up to date, and we would have to think about the nudges to make both sides, kind of, because you need both sides. It's kind of like a chicken and the egg situation on both ends to make it work. Was really enlightening, because in the events world, a lot of events just depend on kind of like job title as your marker of who somebody is or what their area is, and this was going way deeper than that. And for me, it was clear the opportunities are huge if we could apply that type of thinking more broadly to the events industry, and often with those type of more advanced solutions. Context was acquired by Apex, so it's gone into the financial sector world, because that's the area it works in. A lot of times in the events industry, that type of tech doesn't keep within the events business. So that's where it was a really eye-opening experience and very valuable experience for me.
One quick question. I mean, from when you were thinking of the SaaS piece of this of the solution, what I hear is that there is a lot of work. Both the fund managers and the family offices, the both sides had to do a lot of work to
Yes.
update. How challenging was this? Because one of the biggest challenges in the SaaS industry is to get anybody to do anything.
Yes, that's the big challenge, and that's the big challenge I'd say in events as well. Is this kind of concept of motivated buyers or motivated sellers to do the work, and typically, if people do the work, they actually get. Well, they need to get more out of it as well. So, like, is there a path to why am I doing this work? And so in terms of we think of selling on the allocator side, and if we think about events on the buyer side. There's a lot of work to be done in terms of selling a vision of how them doing certain work is going to make their experience easier for them. And so when you look at kind of the value of what communities are doing is that, can I access information or connections that will save me time? And so for the allocators, they are looking for investment opportunities where they can get a better return. And so if there's a new area, so let's just take, crypto, for example, digital funds. There's new funds popping up all the time. People, it's hard to keep track of them. Even the best consultants in the world, from Russells or Mercers, they cannot keep track of all the new people popping up, because you might just have, a guy in North Carolina with a few friends who maybe have come from the industry or come from outside the industry, and they're getting stellar returns and no one knows about them. So the platforms like we had are very useful to those allocators to kind of definitely find the newer funds, keep track of ones, and be able to kind of just see, am I missing something? And I think the same applies to events where, if I am in a buyer persona, I'm often looking for things to make my life easier. When it comes to startups, they're popping up, and maybe I'm not aware of this new startup that can help me. But events can be a great space to find new ideas. So in terms of kind of like, why would an allocator fill out a very detailed survey? They need to be sold on the vision of why it's going to be helpful, and they need other allocators or other people that they trust in the industry to say it's worth your time. Fill out the survey. Do it. It's going to save you in your time in the long run. And what we basically had, is you get a lot of stories of people who got wins. Where did you find this great fund manager? I found it from this event, right? Or I found it from using this technology, and happy partnerships that had come through that. The stories around those are super powerful, because all the work is not work anymore. People are excited about, I want that story. I want that win. I want to find that new manager, or the manager. I want to find that anchor investor, or basically, is it worth my time? And these stories really help with that. So it's part on you to sell the vision. It's part in the industry to let those stories permeate through the industry that you're doing. But that is an untapped opportunity for our industry in terms of, can we get people on both sides to do more work so it can be more powerful to you? Good data in, good outcomes. Bad data in, you're not going to get that recommendation. And I know how it is myself. If I go to an event that has 3,000 people, it's very difficult to find the person that I'm looking for. If I'm looking for a particular solution, it can be overwhelming. The paradox of choice can be very tough. So to anything that can make my life easier is going to be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched upon many points there, which is about your core interest area, which is how do you ensure the buyers and sellers are meeting. The right buyer is meeting the right seller, right? So that's a holy grail of sales, right?
Yeah.
If you could offer that as a solution, I mean, without doubt, it will be a multi-billion-dollar company.
Yes.
But it's a very, very hard problem to solve.
It's super hard.
Yeah. So one question is: have you noticed, because you are in this, as we sort of look at registering for an event, people do not fill up. I would say 90% of the people do not fill up anything. Literally. I mean, they know that if I choose the topics of interest, some recommendations will come to me. It's not that people are completely devoid of how this kind of software works. They understand, I think. I mean, it's
Yes.
not early days anymore. People have gone through this multiple times. They have registered multiple times, and so on and so forth. But there's a huge reluctance of actually sharing information in a place where you are going to share information. The whole point of you going to an event or a trade show is to share information, to tell the vendor what you need and to hear from the vendor what they can do for your need, right? So do you see this? This is just as like a sidebar for our conversation. Do you see that, and do you have any idea why this is going on?
Well, I think it's just in terms of the sharing of information. There's one, the easy route. If I can click through and don't have to share any information, just register. That's ultimately what I'm trying to do. Yeah. So, that's an aspect of that event organizer. We don't want to make it painful to people to register. But in terms of the not being willing to share information, I think it comes down to what people can share, what they're willing to share, and again, if the payoff is there. So it's about the why am I doing it, and the other aspect is like there's some information that maybe you don't need to even have people do the burden of filling it out themselves. But there's information we can derive from certain things that they do. So in terms of decisions that people make, if they have an agenda for an event, let's say, and they choose certain topics, well, I'm starting to see that they're interested in climate, for example. So there's maybe a flow of climate. That is making it easy for people to give you the information that is useful for you. And there's a book I love that's called Nudge, and it's kind of this principle of can you nudge people to make the decisions that's beneficial to them. Yeah. And I'll give you a simple example of myself. Like yoga. I'm not great at yoga. I find it's very fantastic for me as I'm getting older to do. There's a yoga studio near me. Last week, somebody who's the instructor said to me, so put your hand up if you do want some help, right? So I'm there in the dark, hiding away, hoping no one notices me. And I don't put my hand up because I'm just getting through the hour. Now, this week, the instructor says, put your hand up if you do not want me to come and help you. Right. And I still put my hand down. I don't put my hand down, up. I leave it down because it's just easier. I'm just kind of like, I'm kind of indifferent. Right. So that's where I am. It's not like I'm actively decided one or the other ways. Fast forwards, and this thing about yoga, there's some guy, you imagine this scenario, he's balancing on his upside down on his fingertip in the corner. And there's me 6 foot, curled up in a ball, doing some very strange things, sweating and being quite embarrassing. But she comes around and adjusts your knee slightly, and that's good for me. I'm now going to be better at this. I'm going to get more from this. It's so at the end of the session, I feel like I have benefited from going to this session more. I've learned something, so I feel good. Now the nudge was was it opt in or opt out? And in the events world, in the community building world, if you just take it on the virtual aspect, there are millions of these opportunities to nudge people in the right way. Now, you don't want to be oppressive with it because the reaction is to do that. And I might also, if I feel like that, I'm probably going to put my hand up to actively opt out. Yeah. But if it's done in the right way, there's those wins, and it's multiple wins, and it's multiple components of the community. So that's where we had to put a lot of thought into that in my previous role. When you're building a community, of what are the nudges going to be to create the behaviors that are going to be beneficial to both them and us, because ultimately we want people to have a stellar experience in whatever they're experiencing, and that's beneficial to the event as a whole.
It's time for a short break. Stay with us. After the break,
in this environment, the booth was just to make it easy to not miss meetings. So it's very interesting to see a different format of event, or a different focus of event, in terms of, and the behavior of people, and what people are buying, why they are buying certain things, or why they're doing certain things. So that was also very interesting kind of takeaway of the different purposes behind real estate within expo trade show floors.
You are listening to a Bizcast audio original. Podcasting is one of the fastest growing content marketing avenues today. We can help you exploit this largely untapped marketing opportunity. We can craft your audio strategy and leverage the wide reach and easy streaming capability that smartphone penetration provides. It is powerful and personal. Talk to us to find out how podcasting can help you build your brand and reach out to target audiences. Welcome back. I'm Shubhanjan Sarkar, your host for the Trade Show podcast and founder of PitchLink, the visitor engagement platform. Let's dive right back into the episode. Is there anything else that stood out during your period while you were at Context 365 that you think is a legacy that you're carrying through to the current engagement?
Yeah, it's very interesting doing a meetings-based event where we sold booths, and the booths were only there as vehicles for meetings. And that was very interesting in terms of, whereas in other events I've been a part of, booths are there to show off and what have you, and to, in certain instances to be more creative with. In this environment, the booth was just to make it easy to not miss meetings. So it's very interesting to see a different format of event, or a different focus of event, in terms of, and the behavior of people, what people are buying, why they are buying certain things, or why they're doing certain things. So that was also very interesting kind of takeaway of the different purposes behind real estate within expo trade show floors. So that was amazing. And then in terms of the building of a technology platform, the data that is useful to people, to kind of find the data to make, to fill that void, because ultimately the objective was capital raising, and to help that quite complicated, tough process, and to be mission driven around that. And that was really a big undertaking to try and do. So that was there's certain takeaways, and the challenge as well in terms of the interaction between events and year-round strategies. Yeah. That sometimes there's an assumption there that if you have this community event, they'll behave a certain way year-round, and it's different. It has to be treated differently. So there was some good takeaways there of what works year-round and what works for a focused event where you have people's attention and they act in a certain way.
So what is your takeaway actually, that are people who are coming to a certain focused event, do they want engagement with the buyers and the other attendees year round, or is it too much to actually manage because we are already sort of overloaded with the social engagements and social apps and so on and so forth? So to have, like, if I'm attending 5 events and I have 5 different apps trying to do social amongst them, it's a very, very difficult thing.
My takeaway is that it totally depends. The way you get into trouble is if you assume somebody that goes to an event wants that community year round, because a lot of people might actually love the event for the fact that I'm working day to day, but here's this period where I go and source new managers or go and meet with people, do my meetings. I'm really efficient about it and like that aspect. And then there's other people who feel that that's a very much a component of their year round, and they want that year round interaction. So it can't be the same thing. So you can't treat the event community as exactly the same as the year-round community. There's actually a differentiator. And so in terms of creating that, you almost need to create 2 communities of one, the in-person people who are coming to the event for that specific thing. And then I go back to the opt-in thing, and I opt in to this year-round community. And there needs to be some action on their path to opt in, because the worst experience, if you think about it, is look at these dating apps. You have I'm married now with a kid, so I'm not on any dating apps, but you hear about these, people swiping, 100 swipes to get one. That's a painful experience for anybody. True. And so in terms of having kind of ghost people on the platform is no use. It would be better if there's only 10 swipes, but those people are genuinely on there, and that's less frustrating for both sides.
Agreed. I totally agree with you. And there's a lot to be discussed around this piece, but let's move on. We'll keep that for another day, as I said, because we still have to come back. We have to come back to the ROI thing.
We're covering 3 decades, right? So
exactly, right. We have to be patient. We can't just like slam it all into a sandwich, right? Yeah. So So once this acquisition happened with Apex, you moved to Connective, and was it good to be back into the event space, or was it like, okay, now, because I can totally feel that you had a, for the lack of a better word, a really big itch to get into the tech side of this, and because you could see that happening in the pandemic, right? So there's a lot that can be done with tech, which you are not even paying attention to when you are organizing events. So how did this transition happen, and what was going on when you joined Blueprint?
Yeah, so I had a lot of connections to Connective, which is the event studio that Blueprint's a part of. I had seen Jay Weintraub speak at a conference many years ago, and he is a wonderful speaker and just one of those kind of like thinkers in the space that I was really impressed by. I also knew some of the investors like Marco and also people that worked on other projects like Manifest. So I had a ton of connections to Connective, and basically as the acquisition was going through for Apex, connected with them, and I was looking at different opportunities as well. But what really sold it for me in terms of taking on Blueprint, which had already launched, but there was just an opportunity to take it to the next level, was to work closely with the team there, because they looked at events slightly different from the kind of core event industry, and so I wanted to immerse myself in that. They're also very tech forward. They Jay and Marco invest in event software, and so, given my background at Context, I was excited about that, and just really to kind of work closely. There was the opportunity to work on a much more strategic, hands-off, high-level role. At Terrapin, at times I had 40 employees, and that's very different. You spend a lot of your time working on strategy and in meetings with the teams, the team leaders. You're not close to the market sometimes. You have to really make an active, okay, I'm going to dedicate a few hours a week to really dig into the market. I kind of was excited about the opportunity with Blueprint because I would be working with the market directly. So that was the attractive aspect. So it's kind of like a hands-on role, but also a leadership role. And it was this project that you could kind of dive into. Again, at Terrapin, I'd work on multiple year events year round. At Context, I was working on multiple different products, and we'd have multiple events. So this was an opportunity to just lean into one event and see what we could do year round. And that was exciting to just kind of get my teeth into. And it's been 2 years, and we've taken the event. You've grown every year, and it's just been really a great process to work with the Connective team to look at events slightly differently. And I've been in events a long time, but I went into that experience with my eyes open in terms of I wanted to uncover new angles, to approach events in different ways, and that has been great for that.
So would you sort of elaborate on this, that the Connective take on events and the fact that you feel it's different? Talk about that a bit. How is it different from the typical event that happens?
Yeah, so basically, in terms of like a Blueprint, it's an industry-wide event, and the power of that. So you're working year round on that. Whereas with Terrapin, you'd sometimes work on events that were quite, now in the past, I'm talking about when at the very beginning, which are very specific. So for example, I launched an event called 130/30 Funds, which was a very narrow area. It was super successful at that time, just pre the recession. It was kind of the merger of quant investing. But it was very narrow in terms of the area. Whereas the kind of the way that Connective looks, so they're looking for a big enough industry-wide event that is attractive to investors, essentially. So like VCs, would it be worth a VC's time to go to this event? And if it's too narrow in the real estate world, if it's like a multi-family event, a venture capital firm is not going to go there. And essentially, the Connective model leans into that. So there's a power to the kind of partnerships we have with different investors, the access or understanding to founders who are doing interesting things, to create a sense of doing things differently to the standard events that are in that industry, is beneficial from this approach. And that was it's just a great structure to be part of and to see the benefits of that. And essentially the disruptive nature of that is that from being very tech forward in terms of the events, as opposed to thinking of it just as an industry event from the get-go, but being more tech forward in the beginning, opens you up to have this kind of buzz around it. And so you can essentially disrupt areas. So that's the power of being connected. And that's been one of the great kind of learnings of the opportunities with that, that has been beneficial in terms of being part of it.
So can you tell a little bit more about Blueprint itself? I mean, what is it that you are doing, and what do you hear from attendees and people who are participating as vendors, and what are the takeaways that event professionals can have from the experience that you are having over the last 2 years since you joined and you have executed? You just came out of one, right?
Yes, yeah. So we just ran the event last month, and it's certainly our best ever, and we're very proud of it. And I don't want to. It's always better if somebody else compliments your event, right, than me, because I work at it year round. But I can certainly compliment the team and the broader connective team for what they've done to support the show, and it's been a pleasure working on that with them. But in terms of what we've built, it's. So across the real estate, construction, climate tech as it pertains to the built world, we have brought together the investment communities, that's the VCs, now a lot of the private equity firms as well, who are investing in companies in that space. The founders, both from your small startups to your larger firms, who, from your kind of startup like a Tongo to a CoStar. And then also the owners, operators, developers, general contractors who are piloting and using technology. So those are kind of like our three pillars. And we basically had about 2,500 people registered this year. And it was a great blend, a mix of people. And essentially we took the event from being very well known for being fantastic in terms of startups being able to raise money in the beginning of their journey of a company, and Blueprint was definitely a place where you would go to do that. To now also people doing business there in terms of pilots or things being approved within the show. So we have many different dynamics within the show. So it's different to kind of your basic trade show where you have kind of one side and the other, and it's very clear who there is. For a Blueprint event, people come for many different reasons, and that's the power of it. And the other strength of it is versus kind of like a sector specific event. When I say sector, I mean, let's say single family rental, just very specific within real estate, is that we want to offer the opportunity for people to, yes, meet with their community. So to make it very powerful for them to come to a community within the show, but also to have that aha moment of seeing something different. And we do the event in Vegas, and so maybe one point on this would be, like Tony Robbins. I was speaking to an attendee who went to an event in New Zealand run by Tony Robbins. Do you know how long Tony Robbins does his events for? Do you know how many days?
No idea.
6 days. And I've heard him talk about this. He does it for 6 days. And the reason why he does it for 6 days is because he's looking for people to lean into the experience, commit themselves, and have that kind of aha moment of how they're going to make a change. And if you leave before 6 days, he's found it's difficult to generate that aha moment.
Yeah.
Now, that's for people going, this B2C, it's consumers, it's people, right, who are kind of leaning into that. They're committing, they're already on that journey anyway. In the B2B world, you can't translate everything that's B2C. So 6 days is too long. But there's a power to having people be truly engaged in 3 days, or the majority of 3 days, versus some events where people might be, let's say a New York event, often, the risk of that is people pop in for a session and come out. There's not that commitment to it. So we benefit a lot from people truly committing to the experience, experiencing things that may be outside of their immediate comfort zone, and coming away with an aha moment, and also making connections that they wouldn't necessarily always make, but can be really powerful. And the other component is we really nail the tier one people, across all the angles.
Right. And what did you say to the inherent sort of contradiction of a content led conference, or a content led expo, which is like an expo and conference put together? So the time people can spend at the booths meeting people
Yeah.
is restricted by the sessions you want to attend, right? And I have not seen a very efficient way this is managed, in the sense that there's no efficient way of creating a balance that for so long you'll have time to do this, and you'll not miss out on some other stuff, and so on. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thought is to enable the choice, for the most part. I mean, when it comes to the main stage where it's grand and what have you, we do not open the expo, and that's similar to lots of other kind of events. And I think there's a power to that, to having everybody come together in one place, to see the scale of everybody, and to have your main speakers, who are hopefully the pioneers of the industry, up on stage. You want people to experience that. Yes. So that's something that you want to enable. But when it comes to the rest of the time, I think it comes back to what I was saying before, is that people have different motivations for coming to an event. I have some partners who are over in LinkedIn posts of like, they do not watch one single session. They come and they pack their agenda with meetings, and that's what they come to the event for, right? And that's their motivation. And then there's other people who go to learn, and they go for educational purposes and content. And so your motivations might be different. And this is actually an interesting aspect of kind of conferences and the rationale behind conferences. If I go back to the beginning of my Terrapin days, or if I talk to my colleagues there of like the rationale of why people went to events, sometimes people in those days used to go for content. And for certain areas, like sectors like the pharmaceutical industry, people still go to content because they like that format of the presentation style. And so you might have people genuinely buying a ticket to digest content. It's kind of interesting now as well in terms of the online space. Substack has kind of cropped up as a aspect that people are paying for content again, good quality content. There's a partner of ours for Blueprint who has a Substack called Thesis Driven, Brad Hargreaves. It's amazing. It's something that is just wonderful in terms of the deep dives they take into the industry. That's just not available anywhere else in terms of content. So that's fascinating to me in terms of the content aspect. Is there a role for some forms of content that's hard to access in the future? But it's not it's a tool to bring in certain people, for sure. There's an ability to demonstrate thought leadership for people, so it's important for that aspect. It also sets the tone of the event in terms of who is there. So like when you want to get a feel for the event, the speaker lineup gives you that idea, like the mix of people, like what are you trying to say about who will be there? People make split-second decisions. So the speaker lineup helps them make that decision around that. So I think that the speaker lineup, for me, plays an important role. And I've obviously come from a producer background, so I value content. I'm also very aware of shows which it's not part of the equation. It's much more of a pure trade show. So it's not necessarily necessary, but in the formats that I have been familiar with, it is a very useful tool. And there's also, in terms of technology, there's useful insights to be gained from content as well. So it's kind of like where people are interested in, what topics they're gravitating for. You have and then even going to activations in terms of areas that you might have certain sectors or focus areas, beacons that kind of track that. That's very, very useful.
Right. So a quick question on the economics of this. What would you say is a typical breakdown of revenue for an event organizer like this between attendee tickets, sponsorship, and actual exhibitors paying for the booth? What would be the broad revenue distribution between the three?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So now I'll go back to the old days. Yeah. Now I know that at one point it was like 80 attendee revenues, this is kind of like in the old conference world, 8% delegate revenue, 20% sponsorship. Then it became kind of 50-50. And then for a lot of shows, particularly as you go larger, it would go up to like 80-20 in terms of sponsorship versus attendee revenue. And then some, trade shows just do away with attendee revenue. It's not the key thing. Why focus on it? So let's just lean into the sponsorship totally. And I've done events that kind of like tick all of those. For the connective model, attendee revenue is an important component. So sponsorship is still the larger entity, but the attendee revenue is still so important, and the rationale there is it's pitched at a high level. So if I'm doing an event for for accountants who they're purchasing, what they're purchasing is just a software for them to use year round. The purchase price might be $259.
Yeah,
that's very different to a CTO or somebody who's going and making decisions on for a large amount of people for a big budget and C-level conversations. So the pricing of a ticket depends upon that. So in terms of our model, we're very much and there's other kind of models or events like health and these type of entities. They make a lot of money on the attendee revenue; it's significant, but they will make more money on the sponsorship overall.
And what about the exhibitor? Are you counting that as part of the sponsorship? The exhibitors who are paying for the booth?
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, it's different type. In terms of my old days, you would kind of classify specs as the old term. We don't really use that. Connective, but that's kind of like to merge the two. And yeah, you'd look at them potentially differently in terms of kind of like, hey, who's investing in thought leadership versus who's just looking for a piece of real estate at the show.
How difficult is it to get senior people to come to travel and come to a show? I don't know at what price point Blueprint is. I'm assuming it's a couple of $1,000s at least. How difficult is it to get this huge number of people to actually dedicate like 4 days, travel, maybe 5 days, maybe a good part of a week to come and attend the event? I mean, what goes into that?
Well, I think it goes back again to kind of like motivation of the person. And the most powerful thing is, regardless of all marketing strategies, it's the word of mouth in powerful circles. Is this a valuable event? Why is it a valuable event? What are you coming there for? Right. And if the right circles are choosing your event to go to, they bring in the most powerful other people, because it's kind of like saves them all time to gather. And a Blueprint or an event like that, there are many different events that happen around Blueprint that just are created. And so we're creating the platform, but there's all these other activations and events and things happening around the umbrella. That is our term. And if I look back to persuading powerful people, back to my Terrapin days, that I used to run an event called Hedge Funds World Zurich, and I used to read the Financial Times, and there was an article there by Peter Thiel, who invested in Facebook, and he had a global macro fund at the time. And this article gave me exactly what his strategy was, who he's looking for. He's looking for family offices to invest in this. And I was doing this event in Switzerland. He's in Palo Alto. And I wrote to him, but with a very specific invitation that picked out all the key points of his strategy and matched who would be in attendance. And his team was super excited about it. He flew over, and so that's somebody flying over to Europe, basing a whole trip around your proposition, because you've just matched what they're looking for at the right time with the right people, and that's you doing it yourself. The other component is, are other people doing that, for you? And that's something that's is the most powerful opportunity. If you can unlock that and you think very creatively about that, the world's your oyster.
That's a gem of a story. I don't know how many people you told this story to, but but I got it out of you.
Well, there's another funny kind of a speaker one was I was doing an event in Brazil. And I was a big UFC fan, and so we invited Royce Gracie, who won UFC 1. That was the funniest one, because he turned up and I was in the rooftop of the Hotel Uniki with my team there. Harriet had confirmed him. He turned up and we paid him some money, not a crazy amount, but he turned up and we were like, so do you have any slides or anything, or what have you? We just all done it through an agent. It was very kind of like a side done. And he was like, no, but I've got lots of good stories. And we just chatted to him. And it ended up basically, I had to go on stage and interview him on stage. But he was just amazing. He had stories of him falling off a horse at breakneck speed. He was a bit of an adrenaline junkie. And we went out in Sao Paulo. He's Brazilian. He's from Rio. But he'd never been to Sao Paulo before. And that was really fun. You're kind of walking around with a celebrity, all these Brazilians wanting to get a selfie with him. And he doesn't drink. So we went to like a juice bar. So it's those type of experiences that are super, super fun in terms of people you can get to meet in the events world.
Of course. This is fascinating. I mean, that could be one reason I'll say, okay, remember 20 stories and come back and we'll do one more episode, right?
well, the funniest story was there. He wanted to choke me out on stage, and I basically did not give him permission to do that. That would have been the big story if I passed out on stage at the investment summit by Hoisey Gracie, who is obviously a jiu-jitsu master.
Wonderful. So last question. I know we're sort of reaching the limit of our time. I think one of the most contentious points, I would say, not an issue, but a point, is proving of ROI. So if you're an organizer, proving a ROI to the sponsors, the booth, the vendor, the company which has come and booked a booth, and looks like there is no good method which is acceptable for people beyond perception, that this worked and it didn't work and so on. You had touched upon the attendee buyer-seller engagement bit, which also is a pretty, should I say, flaky space even today, right? I mean, people are doing things, but not enough. I mean, lead retrieval of scanning the badge is really not going to do that. Okay. So what do you think should be the way that vendors as well as, organizers of large events and trade shows should be focused on to understand the ROI on their investment?
Yeah, great question. It's a big challenge for our industry. What I've noticed though is that companies have just got a lot better at deciding themselves whether they're getting ROI, and the marketing teams are becoming much more sophisticated. And it was interesting working on some shows. You walk in and the data points they have for their own events are amazing, and so that was kind of good takeaways for me in terms of what could we integrate. For certain large sponsors, they have they break it down. They know exactly why they do the event. Maybe it's for their brand, and so those are kind of maybe more harder to define, but they know that is useful for their brand. But when it comes to lead generation, now I go into meetings and they have the exact number of leads that they've pulled in of people who are new clients. They know what they've done with existing clients. It's so they have a lot of the time a very sophisticated handle on whether this was a success or not, and the teams within those companies are asking for more and more. So I think it's going to get more and more diligent, in the same way people have asked of digital things, of, when we look at certain things in terms of referral partners, we know how much revenue is tied to a code link or what have you. But there's also aspects that we know that are hard to attribute. And so that's the kind of the kicker with the ROI aspect, is like attribution and just understanding that. But in terms of coming back to the question around events, I feel like companies themselves are getting better at analyzing the booths. It's about the event organizer making it very easy to capture the data. And so in terms of kind of like scanning badges and what have you, we have we've integrated an aspect with Grip where you can just click at the back of the badge and it made it very easy to connect. So again, it's just simple things of nudges. So are you making it super easy, and are you making it easy for the data to be flow to the person that needs it? And if that is done seamlessly, that is helpful to all the other aspects of generating ROI. And the other aspect of ROI for me is, going back to the connection point. The worst thing for me as an event organizer is somebody saying, I didn't have a good time because I was looking for X profile, let's say airlines, for example, CTOs of airlines, and there were no airlines here. And you in your head know there's millions of airlines. So in the old, in smaller events, somebody said that to me, I'd walk around and I might have them marked by a badge or what have you, and I could introduce them to airlines. And I know, that's an airline, that's an airline, that's an airline. Now, when you get to a certain scale, that's impossible to do. So the key thing is with regards to your technologies to enable people to find the profiles they're looking at in an easy way. And if you do that, the ROI will be proved through their metrics that they have in their own backend system. But the key thing for us as organizers is to make the nudges work so that the people can find each other and that they can prove the ROI to their organizations back there. And the other component is, for a blueprint, we typically get the top person, CEO. So that makes it a lot easier in terms of selling in for future years. If the top person and the team are there together, a lot of that kind of reporting angst disappears.
Yeah. But that's a hard thing to pull off for most events. I would presume. It's not easy to get the CEO to come to a trade show or a conference. I mean, it's hard.
It's hard, but that's where the thought process of like what would attract a CEO was super important. And sometimes in terms of events and just event organizers, maybe people settle, and when you settle, you set a different tone for your event. So if there's a race to excellence and again, coming back to selling a vision that is useful for a CEO, that the way a CEO thinks this is a valuable use of my time, it's the right place for me to be. Is this where I should be? And where the team are like, you should be there. It becomes, and then once you have your first 50, it's easy to get your next 450. It's the first few that are the hardest.
Yeah. I think that sort of plays out in many scenarios, the first 50 or the first 10, the first 20. Absolutely. So before we wrap this up, where do you see, I had a nice chat with Marco and he spoke about the future of events and how he looks at it. For him, a music concert is also an event. So he's not really focused on only trade shows the way we are we like to talk, but it's always so fascinating to talk to him. So from your point of view, still sticking to, say, B2B, what do you see happening in the next, say, 2 to 5 years that people can look forward to? Anything that you think would sort of indicate where we are headed?
I had an interesting conversation in the real estate world with an investor who invests in startups servicing offices and retail space. And she used to work on a hotel that I went to, which is called Savannah in Arizona. And I went to this place. It was on a baby moon when we were expecting our first child. And you walk in there and you experience something totally different. It's just quiet. And it's not because you don't talking science. People are just quiet. They're in robes. There's just a different vibe, essentially. And you lean into this different experience, and it's just very calming. All your worries just disappear. And she said something to me interesting in terms of the future of work. She said she learned something from the experience of developing those type of properties, of that you want to almost recenter people on their journey to the office. So people aren't looking at offices now as just an office space. They're looking at the total environment around the office space, like the retail shops, the meditation areas, whatever there is that's around the office. The office is only one component. It's a much more holistic view. And I think that the event space is going to be similarly impacted by this kind of aspect of like holistically, what is it, the experience as you enter into that, like how are you being recentered? And I want to turn that person who maybe just came for, I don't like those shows in those cities where somebody goes in for an hour and comes out. That's not a show I want to be part of. I want to be a show where people commit to it. And that's why we do it. We did Blueprint in Vegas, for example. And you do certain things to make it sticky. So in terms of kind of like the future events, I feel like there'll be more holistic approaches to understanding the journey, the multiple journeys of different events. And so this is already happening, but it'll be on another scale. Like the future is personalization. So very, very soon, everyone will have a very, very personalized journey within the event. And obviously they'll have collective experiences where they'll bond, but no one person's experience will be the same. And that will be very easy to decipher different journeys and make everything a lot more simple for people to navigate. And, you think of, let's talk about festivals where, Marco, looks at festivals as well. Festivals are amazing. There's a festival in UK called Shambhala. And that experience just changed the way I look at events as well. Like the total recentering of everybody. And you had different experiences. You had kids, you had people who are experiencing kind of like hardcore music on the one side. You had sessions, like conference sessions. So people are going for different reasons. But the overall aspect is there was a Shambhala feeling that united them all, even though one family's experience is totally different to a 21-year-old who's going with their friends. And it had this kind of like this feel to it. And that's where the events in the future will have to define their overall feel, but be very clear on the tailored specific experiences depending on what someone's looking for, if it's education connections or certain segments.
Martin, this has been fascinating, and I really think there's so many things you touched upon that I sort of skipped. I know that there are 10 questions in my mind, and I know that the listeners would hugely benefit from discussing those. And I would really hope that I'll be able to get you back. And I mean, ideally, I would love to talk to you once a quarter.
That sounds good. I mean, the thing is, that's the funny aspect about falling into the events business, as many of us did, is there was a light bulb went off with myself at some point of like, this is an area that needs to be studied. Yeah. And I feel like a student of the areas that I work in. That's my kind of comfort zone. And to be a student of the events business, it's a fascinating area. And you mentioned like Marco and Jay; those are true students as well, and they're always learning and what have you, and figuring out different ways to do it. Greg Hitchin, the same way at Terrapin, and that's it in terms of kind of like unpacking it. There's a lot to the psychology of human behavior. And there's certain things that we can learn from other areas. And it's about understanding what is appropriate for the B2B space that will work. How can you influence human behavior in the right way? And when you look at it, often it's there's opportunities to unlock things. And it's wild. Sometimes you can surprise yourself about what people be willing to do. And that's what I love about the event space. It's a beautiful area to build and see it come to life. And people get that instant gratification when it comes to life. So, you talk about feedback. That's one of the reasons why I love it, is because the industry that you serve, they feel the power of it. And they often, they attribute it. They say, look, my journey was set on this particular course because I had this encounter and an event. And that's just a wonderful thing to be a part of in terms of your mission in life.
Absolutely. Because I really, and you actually hit upon two very important things that I personally believe about events. One is intent, other is serendipity.
Yep.
Both of these are extremely crucial. That's how life happens.
Yes.
PitchLink makes buying easy by enabling high-quality engagement between buyers and sellers. Through its presentation and discussion modules, sellers create customized sales narratives using sales collaterals and personal videos and reach out to prospects through a non-intrusive, buyer-qualified engagement process. PitchLink requires no installation or download, contains and manages the entire repository of sales collaterals and buyer-seller conversations. Talk to us to know more about how you can engage with customers without interruption. Connect with us on LinkedIn or visit tradeshowengage.com. That is tradeshowengage.com. Nobody comes to a trade show allocating money and time to just not do anything.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And the fact that you can, with natural organic encounters, you can meet new people who can give you new ideas, whether it's in the main stage, whether it's in a seminar hall, or whether it's in a booth encounter. You meet people who can then change. It doesn't matter what he's selling, or what she's selling. It's just the perspective, like you told about this lady who runs these properties. It's a perspective she has left. It's not about that hotel you went to and maybe the great experience. That's only one part of it.
Yes.
But what she told you,
she changed my perspective. She gave me something that I actually probably understood that, but I hadn't heard it articulated in the way she did. And then once she did that, it's reframed the way I look at the event space, which is funny because she's talking about real estate and the office, the future of the office. And it's amazing how that, and you've hit the nail on the head there. That's why I like the industry-wide events, because you can, just like I had that aha moment, somebody in our industry can have that aha moment. That happens multiple times in terms of they're usually in these very siloed event experiences where it's an echo chamber, and they can escape that. They can have the same aha moment I've just had.
Absolutely. Martin, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I hope to see you again. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did.
Oh, very much so. Thank you so much, Supanjan. Appreciate it. And we will speak soon.
We have a fantastic lineup over the next couple of episodes featuring great conversations on engaging your booth visitors and maximizing your ROI from your trade show investments. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you do not miss a single episode. Thanks for listening. Thank you for being with us today on the Trade Show Podcast, the podcast of record for the trade show and events industry. Here we talk to movers and shakers of the $50 billion trade show industry and identify ideas, challenges, tactics, and strategies to leverage the first-party intent inherent in the trade show business. We hope this conversation helped inform and motivate as we all navigate a rapidly changing business environment. For us, these are enlightening conversations enriched with knowledge and expertise. We encourage you to go out and implement some of the ideas we discussed today. We hope to have you with us again in the next exciting episode of the Trade Show Podcast. If you liked what you heard, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast platform like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast from, and give us a rating while you are at it. This is a Bizcast original podcast and is produced for Pitchling, the next generation visitor engagement platform where our mission is to make buying easy. Hosted by Shubhanjan Sarkar and produced by Rajiv Aditya. See you next time and have a wonderful day.